Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of The Lone Ranger. Now, this was a project I was interested in until they released the trailer, and I'm not really sure why the trailer totally underwhelmed me. Unlike White House Down, it didn't look bad or anything, it just didn't excite me at all. But really, everything about the project sounded intriguing. It was a Western. Not only that, it was a big budgeted Western, and I am a huge Western fan. I love all of John Wayne's movies. Actually, I prefer spaghetti Westerns even more, and I know that the director happens to be a big fan of Sergio Leone, the king of spaghetti Westerns, so I was really anticipating that, a lot of homage there, and, that Morricone-esque music that some of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies had. And it had Johnny Depp as he's the leading star. Even though technically Archie Hammer is the main character, Johnny Depp's going to be the person we're going to be paying attention to the most. And, it was directed by the guy who gave us the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And, even though there's been a lot of backlash against Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3, I actually prefer 2 over 1. And even though 3 is the weakest film of the first 3 movies, I still enjoy it. They're all flawed films, but I do think they're all entertaining. Now, it wasn't until Pirates 4, which had a different director, where I started to turn against that franchise. So this should have been awesome, right? Well, then the reviews came in, and everybody was pretty angry with this movie. Very few people liked it, and even the ones who gave it positive reviews conceded that it wasn't as good as it should have been, and that's kind of where I'm at. See, this isn't really a positive review, it's just a very lukewarm review. I thought the film, it wasn't bad, it wasn't anywhere near as fun as it should have been. And there are a few reasons for that. For one, there is way too much going on in terms of the story. I mean, it shouldn't be this complicated. They introduce all these different characters, and all played by respectable actors, such as Barry Pepper and Helena Bonham Carter, and they all do fine, but I did feel like a lot of these characters weren't necessary, especially as the characterizations are kind of erratic. Like, the filmmakers keep changing their mind as to where they want to go with these characters, and so it just made everything seem a bit convoluted, even though they were aiming for ambitious. And this is granted a problem that the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels also suffered from, but even then I felt whenever they'd have a pointless subplot or a pointless character, it never diminished those films' entertainment value. And of course, I have to remind you that entertainment is a very subjective term, so you might have hated those films and found them to be totally unentertaining for those reasons. I didn't, but here I did feel that sometimes a lot of these unnecessary additions did harm the pacing. But even more so than any of that, I hated the main character. Now, Archie Hammer, I believe that's his name, he's a pretty good actor. He's mainly known for playing the twins from The Social Network. I thought he did fine. I don't blame him. But the role is just so poorly written. Pretty much what they're trying to do is the banter between the Lone Ranger and Tonto is supposed to be reminiscent of Jack Sparrow and Will Turner from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, where they're constantly, kind of betraying each other, even though they're supposed to be allies. They don't seem to like each other very much. There's just a lot of back and forth there. But Will Turner wasn't a totally detestable asshole. This guy is. It's just, he's constantly whining. He's constantly screwing up. The movie would have ended within like 10 minutes had this guy not gotten involved. And yet he has a self-righteous attitude that just makes you want to punch him, and he gets worse as the movie progresses. He becomes more of a useless asshole who's constantly screwing up. Whenever he does successfully achieve something, it's just sheer luck. And there reaches a point where he really just starts bitching at Johnny Depp's character Tonto, and just pretty much a reason why he sucks speech. And I thought that was so cruel. There were things that he could have legitimately criticized that character for, but instead he brings up this dark and troubled past that it just made me want that character to die so much. And yet, of course, he develops, but it's just out of nowhere. He's an asshole 1 minute, and then he realizes, oh wait, I screwed up. Then suddenly he's this great hero, and it did not work. I really did not like that character. Every time the movie focused on him, the film would stop dead in its tracks. I would suddenly become uninterested or annoyed. Now, Johnny Depp, on the other hand, I thought did really good. Now, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding his casting. Tonto should be played by a Native American. There's been a lot more controversy, or a lot more, outrage at whitewashing these days. And it's difficult for me to really explain my opinions without taking up too much time, but I've always somewhat sympathized with why studios do that. It seems like whenever you get a more ethnic cast, whenever a studio takes a risk with a minority as the lead character, those films don't do very well. So, for all the bitching at the studios for doing that, clearly they have an actual reason. Now, at the same time, I can understand why people are offended by this. It is not fair, but I do believe that it's a two-way street. If you want to see more movies with, Asian lead characters or Native American lead characters, watch more movies when they do showcase those characters or those actors and leads. But I can definitely share that opinion when it's something like The Last Airbender, where I just felt the cast didn't do very good, and they should have, and if at least they would have been played by Asian characters, that would have been one less thing to bitch about. But if I felt the actors did do a great job and they really fit the roles in spite of their ethnicity, I wouldn't care. For example, I had no problem with the whitewashing of the villain from the newest Star Trek film, because I thought the actor just was so spectacular in that role. Of course, if you feel differently, I understand. I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just explaining my opinion. And I thought Johnny Depp did a really good job here. And a few things that I was worried about, that he'd be playing a very stereotypical Native American, and to a point he is, the whole noble savage thing, but the film seems to acknowledge that, and they really stress that this character is not mentally stable when they do showcase other Native American characters who are played by actual Native Americans, or at least they look like it. They act much more normal and grounded in reality, but I just thought Johnny Depp, he just cracked me up. He had the best lines to work with. He has a lot of funny facial expressions, and I watched a video not too long ago, I believe it was from Beyond the Trailer, and Grace pointed out that his Johnny Depp's acting style has become more of a gimmick than a craft, and that is true. But whereas I really disliked how Johnny Depp acted in roles such as when he was in, I'm stumbling over my words, I apologize, but when Johnny Depp was in Alice in Wonderland, Dark Shadows, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Johnny Depp I found to be more annoying than endearing in those films. So it's not just that I love Johnny Depp. He can really backfire in terms of how his style of acting. Of course, those were all Tim Burton films, now that I think about it, suggesting that Tim Burton no longer knows how to use Johnny Depp properly. But here I thought he had a much better role. He had a much stronger character arc than the Lone Ranger, a much more interesting role. And whenever the film would focus more on him, I was engaged. I was entertained. But unfortunately, he is still the supporting character, so more screen time goes to the annoying Lone Ranger character. So fuck. In terms of the action and special effects, they do use a bit too much CGI, and it's really noticeable, especially when it comes to various animals. Apparently, this reminded me a lot of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where there are gratuitous shots of CGI animals for no real reason, and it is pretty distracting. But sometimes the action set pieces were good, other times they didn't leave an impression on me at all, primarily because the CGI is a bit too noticeable. This may have been one of those films where too much money was put into it. Whenever too much money gets put into a project, it seems like the special effects become more uneven, probably because they figure they could put more time and money into polishing the special effects. Where if you polish special effects too much, it's just going to make them look more like special effects. I will admit, though, that the ending scene was the ending action scene, the finale, that was very exciting. I really enjoyed that. I loved the Lone Ranger theme playing in the background, and even though it's not intense at all, it's actually a very light-hearted finale compared to the rest of the movie, which is much more dark. That was like the only time where I thought the movie itself as a whole was being entertaining. Everything else, it was just in parts. And that's, I guess, another thing I should point out. The tone is pretty erratic too. Like at times it's a bit just too grim and too bleak, and then I'll become really silly and goofy. For those who called this film a train wreck, I could see why. But when it comes to movies like this, I don't know, maybe my expectations lowered too much, but as long as I'm having any kind of fun, I don't care about the more objective flaws of the film. The problem is, once again, is this film is very uneven in terms of its ability to entertain me. Whereas at least with the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels, for all the flaws in those films, I was consistently entertained. Here, I'd say I was entertained about 50% of the time and not entertained the other 50% of the time. Maybe I was entertained a little bit more than that, but that's still a large chunk of time, considering this is a pretty long movie. So, would I recommend it? I don't know. I'd say it's a better rental than something I'd go to the theaters and see. I definitely don't see it in 3D. Don't pay any more than you have to. The movie isn't that good. It's I guess I'd probably say it's a little bit better than White House Down. Probably a little bit, or a fair amount of worse than World War Z, and even Man of Steel, I'd say, was a more successful picture than this. But I don't think it's awful. Once again, I believe that it's one of those films that becomes more frustrating because it should have been better. It could have been much better, but it wasn't. So I just say watch it when it comes out on DVD, or if somebody's willing to pay for your ticket, go ahead and see it in theaters then. Low expectations are your best friend when it comes to movies like this, though, so don't expect anything and be happy if you end up being one of the film's few fans. But once again, with me, I'm very lukewarm either way. So that is all I have to say. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. I plan on doing my next Critiquing the Critics episode, not next week, but maybe the week after. That's when I'm going to start filming, but it'll probably take like 2 or 3 weeks to finish filming because it's going to be a very, very long video, or at least longer than what I'm used to doing. I did written reviews of Tremors 2, Dead Sushi, Death Race 3, and that's all I really remember. So read those. I did not do one for Lone Ranger, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys later.